Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Margaret Pole, the Plantagenet threat to Henry VIII. During the reign of King Henry VIII, it's estimated that around 70,000 people were executed inside of his kingdom. This puts the figure at roughly 3% of the population of Tudor England, meeting their ends in bloody ways. There were a number of incredibly high-profile people executed by Henry, including 2 of his wives, his closest friends, and also his advisors. He tried to also eliminate any possible threat to his throne that may have existed, and one woman who met an incredibly bloody fate inside the walls of the Tower of London was Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury. Even despite being executed at the age of 67, Henry deemed her as a threat due to her links to the House of York. Margaret was born on the 14th of August 1473 in Farleigh Castle in Somerset. She was the only surviving daughter of George Plantagenet, the Duke of Clarence, and his wife Isabell Neville, who was the eldest daughter of the Earl of Warwick, Richard Neville, also known as Warwick Kingmaker. So Margaret was born into the House of York and in particular the ruling royal family. Her father, George Plantagenet, famously turned against his brother King Edward IV during the Wars of the Roses, and despite reconciling with the king, George continued to speak ill about his brother and Edward had enough. George, after plotting a number of times against the king, was arrested and indicted on treason and was sentenced to death. George's death in particular was very savage, being drowned inside a barrel of Malmsey wine whilst inside the Tower of London. It was clear that Edward had enough of his brother, and to sentence him to death in this way was rather brutal. However, before this took place, Isabell Neville, Margaret's mother, passed away when she was 3 years old. Her father believed that one servant had poisoned her, and because of this servant was killed. But within 2 years, her father was also dead, and Margaret was left without any parents. Her father's lands and titles were taken because of the circumstance of his death, but when Margaret was 10, King Edward IV, her uncle, passed away. Following this, Richard III seized the throne following the disappearance of the princes in the Tower and the subsequent rumours that he had murdered them. Richard ordered a statue that barred Edward's children from the throne, claiming that Edward's marriage was invalid. This secured Richard III on the throne, but subsequently also barred Margaret from the throne. So Margaret's uncle, Richard III, was now ruling, and he sent her to Sheriff Hutton Castle. But following the defeat of Richard at the Battle of Bosworth, things changed in England. Henry VII, who had defeated Richard in the deciding battle of the Wars of the Roses, married Margaret's cousin Elizabeth of York to unite the two warring sides of the Plantagenet dynasty under the Tudor name. After this, Margaret and her brother Edward were looked after by the couple, but later Edward, who was considered a Yorkist claimant, was moved to the Tower of London. So Margaret was being looked after by the new King of England, Henry VII, and in around November of 1487, he gave her a hand in marriage to his cousin Sir Richard Pole. His mother was the half-sister of the king's mother, Margaret Beaufort, and this further strengthened links to the crown for Henry. Richard and Margaret's marriage reinforced the Tudor alliance between York and Lancaster, and Richard was involved in the king's government and served in a number of roles for Henry VII, including the Chamberlain for his eldest son and his heir, Arthur, the Prince of Wales. When Arthur married Catherine of Aragon, Margaret Pole became one of her ladies-in-waiting. But following Arthur's death in 1502, her household was dissolved before she later then married Henry VIII. Richard Pole died around 1505, but despite this their marriage had been fruitful, and the two had 5 children together. Richard's death left Margaret in a rather penniless state, with only a small amount of land passed to her. Henry VII paid for Richard's funeral, and things looked dismal for the once former Yorkist claimant to the throne. To help her financial situation, she devoted her 3rd son Reginald to the church, and he later rose to the position of Archbishop of Canterbury. Reginald did dislike the fact his mother seemingly abandoned him, but Margaret was desperate after her husband's death. She had no way to support herself and her children, and even was forced to live inside of Sion Abbey as a guest of the nuns that lived there. She stayed here for roughly 4 years before her fortunes changed significantly. When Henry VIII came onto the throne and married Catherine of Aragon, Margaret's life changed. She must have been liked by Catherine, as Margaret was recalled to become one of her ladies-in-waiting again. She must also have been liked initially by Henry VIII. In 1512, an Act of Parliament restored Margaret the earldom of Salisbury and some of her brother's lands following his execution, and these were worth around £2 million in modern-day money. Henry VII had overseen the land for a while, but it was believed that Margaret would take care of them as well. She did this and managed them rather successfully, and within decades she had become the 5th richest peer inside of the country. Margaret was a keen learner, and she was also keen to impart the importance of new learning and education onto those around her, including her children. Henry Pole, her eldest son, spoke on behalf of the family inside the House of Lords, and her second son Arthur became a prominent courtier, being a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. Reginald Pole also rose to prominence inside the Catholic Church, but Margaret's favour at court rose and fell over the years. In 1518 she got into an argument regarding land with Henry VIII, but in 1520 she became governess to Princess Mary, Henry VIII's eldest daughter. Margaret did stick up for Mary, as when she was declared illegitimate, Margaret refused to give Mary's jewels and gold plate back, and her household was then broken up. It was even suggested that Mary should be handed over to Margaret permanently, but the king regarded her as a fool with no experience to raise her. However, Margaret Pole, along with her son, would fall from grace. In 1531, Reginald Pole, who was rising throughout the Catholic Church, warned and spoke about the dangers of Henry VIII marrying Anne Boleyn. It was suggested that Reginald should have married Princess Mary, later Mary I, to give them both a huge and strong claim to the English throne. Reginald, in the May of 1536, broke from Henry VIII, and this forced Margaret out of court. Following the subsequent downfall of Anne Boleyn and her execution, Margaret did briefly return to the king's court. Reginald became a cardinal in 1537, and he was placed in charge of organising help for the Pilgrimage of Grace, a huge protest against Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries. The English government knew about this and even tried to have Reginald assassinated, but he was involved in organising the papal help to the rebellion. To be associated with Reginald was incredibly dangerous, and his brother Geoffrey was arrested in August of 1538 for writing with him. He was later pardoned. However, Margaret Pole's eldest son Henry was then later executed for treason. The huge investigation into anyone corresponding to Reginald Pole saw the downfall of Margaret in a devastating fashion. During the investigation around Margaret, Thomas Cromwell found a tunic bearing the 5 wounds of Christ allegedly belonging to the Countess of Salisbury. This was seen as a key part of evidence showing Margaret's alleged support for Catholicism and for her son Reginald and the king's Catholic daughter Princess Mary. This was found allegedly 6 months after her house was searched, and it's most probable that this evidence was seen as a false piece and was just plucked out of nowhere. Because of this, Margaret Pole was transported to the Tower of London and would be held here within the walls for 2 years. She was sentenced to death and was executed at any time the king saw fit, which was torture itself, not knowing if her last day was coming or not. At the time of her imprisonment, Margaret was around 65 and was an elderly woman, but she was allowed a large grant of clothing and also a number of servants. But inside the tower, she would suffer greatly with the conditions of her imprisonment. On the morning of the 27th of May 1541, Margaret Pole was told that she would die within an hour. She must have known death was on the horizon. As the wall of her cell, she carved a poem which said, "For traitors on the block should die, I am no traitor, no, not I. My faithfulness stands fast, and so towards the block I shall not go, nor make one step, as you shall see. Christ, in thy mercy, save thou me." She claimed that she had not committed any crime, but it's believed that Henry VIII sought to kill Margaret to stamp out any claim she may have had to the throne. Inside the walls of the Tower of London, she was executed, and she was granted the privilege because of her status and links to the crown, rather than to be taken to Tower Hill. There are different accounts regarding to her execution. However, on Tower Green, A low wooden block had been prepared rather than a scaffold. It's believed this simply just laid on the floor, meaning that Henry probably in some haste ordered her execution, without time for any preparation. One account states that the execution took place in a corner of the tower with hardly any witnesses, which caused doubt. But another account says 150 people were present. It was said that, at first, when the sentence of death was made known to her, she found the thing very strange, not knowing what crime she was accused, nor how she had been sentenced. It was said that her execution was performed by a wretched and blundering youth. As Margaret Pole allegedly lay her head on the block, it's believed that she was very defiant, and the inexperienced axeman made a real mess of the job. It is believed that it took a number of swings of the axe to take her head off her body, and that she turned her head every way. There was even a rumour that emerged that following the first swing from the axe that she leapt up from the block and ran around the Tower of London for her life. The executioner hacked her head and shoulders to pieces, and after the bloody job was done, she was buried inside the chapel inside the tower's walls. Margaret Pole lived a very interesting life, in which she was a genuine claimant to the throne. She rose to prominence and fell a number of times throughout her life. However, today she is regarded as a saint by Catholics. It's believed her execution was a horrific sham that should never have taken place, and it was thought Henry wished to do it to finally stamp out Yorkist claimants to his throne once and for all. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.